It is an extended anniversary night for President Ruto and the Kenya Kwanza administration, which formally completed its first year in office yesterday. From Nairobi to Ruiru, a flood of varying opinions has been flowing, with Kenyans passing their verdict of 1 year of the Ruto administration. Tonight on Newsgang, we assess the law and order space, as well as the law of taxes. We're also joined tonight by our guest gangsters, who are Wanjiru Gikonyo, a governance and policy expert, as well as Irungu Houghton, the executive director of Amnesty International Kenya, who joins us from the human rights space. This is Newsgang.
Kenya Kwanza's first year in office brings to light a series of unfulfilled promises, a prevailing culture of impunity, a continuation of the campaign posture, and the discordant governance experienced in the previous administration. Despite their initial efforts to rectify past governance errors, these attempts are overshadowed by deliberate constitutional violations, empty rhetoric, abuse of human rights, and perpetuation of state demagoguery.
All right, so here we are. Remember, you can join in the conversation. The hashtag is Newsgang at Citizen TV Kenya. You can also send us a text message. The number is 22422. The show begins now, and that was Sheila Masinda from Transparency International during that press conference where members of civil society were giving their assessment of President William Ruto's first year in office and what that portends for the country and indeed for the rest of his term up until 2027. Welcoming our guest gangsters tonight, as we said, Irungu Houghton and Wanjiru Gikonyo. Thank you both for joining the gang tonight. Maybe the best place to begin with is our guests in the house. Irungu, let me begin with you. The president's first year in office, especially when you take a look at the state of human rights and the rule of law. What's your assessment of the first year?
So I think, first thing we have to recognize is that 1 year in a term of national administration is quite a substantive period. It's not a short period, unlike the first year of a child. And therefore, what we would have expected to see is a delivery on some of the promises that were made during the campaigns. The promise for a commission of inquiry into extrajudicial killings, the promise of an assault on state capture would have been very important, I think, to have seen. And what we've seen in some ways is some progress in terms of, for example, the independence of the police, in terms of their budget. But I think, frighteningly, we saw really a breakdown of policing, during the protests this year. And we have documented several times the number of people that were killed, were assaulted, the children that were tear-gassed and suffocated in their homes. And I think what we don't have is we don't have a record to show that that there has been movement on issues like, human rights-based policing. Today, the Independent Medical Legal Unit gave figures for extrajudicial killings over the last year, and they've said that 128 people lost their lives. And I think that would be our starting point in terms of concerns with human rights violations from a policing perspective.
Yeah, and, Caliph Khalifa also spoke about that during that press conference about how the police have conducted themselves over the last year. Let's listen.
It is regrettable and it's threatening to the public that this government is yet to learn the value of life. For police to shoot unarmed civilians to death or to go in their homes and beat them to death, this is unconstitutional. This is wrong, and regrettably, the president himself did not condemn. In fact, alisema polisi wamefanya kazi mzuri.
That's right. And Wanjiru, what are your thoughts around that? The right to life, protection of the same.
Completely agree, with that, especially because the campaign platform for Kenya Kwanza was really association with the hustler. And at the end of the day, when you're talking about police brutality and around the events that take place, it's usually the low-income youth that are the target of extrajudicial action by the police. When you look at the administration as a whole, that came on to campaigned on an economic platform for one, and of course that has then been promised to rationalize taxes because of unsustainable tax burden on Kenyans. And that has really gone the other way to a point where it's inhumane, it's unbearable. And we thought we were done with heavy taxes, and now we see a policy to increase the taxation, even though government reports show that our taxation has stagnated in terms of the collections vis-a-vis the growth of the economy. We've reached that optimum point and past it. We've seen state appointments and the character of appointments and the way state officers conduct themselves, their language, really diluting the integrity of those offices. We've seen, an international conference on climate change that really put Kenya on the map in a really resounding way. And hot on the heels of that, the president then issues a death threat as part of, on a governance issue. So there's discord and disconnect and inconsistencies. So yeah, I think we have a president that ran administration that ran a good campaign, but they're not able to settle down and govern. And so you're seeing a lot of disconnects and some very alarming ones. And we really hope that they could, there's need for reflection and really listening to the criticism that's coming. But when you have an administration that has a leadership style that's, quite defensive on the PR offensive, they're not really listening to this feedback, a lot of which is really telling them, you're making us very worried. There's a feeling of unsettled feeling, not just economically, but also in terms of, should we trust the state or should we be afraid of our leaders and the leader of the land? Yeah,
and the issue of his style of leadership has come up. Linus, we even had a story, I believe, that was done by Seth Olale earlier this week about this, the president's style. He's a lot more hands-on than we have seen with his predecessor. But then that getting sort of mixed review as to whether, a hands-on style is more of it, or it's micromanaging, it's statements that are made, whether it is harsh statements on his members of his cabinet, or in terms of the war on corruption, that now very infamous statement, Mambo Matatu. How are we to sort of interpret this when it comes to how he's going to govern within the confines of the law and the Constitution?
In terms of the sheer physical energy, William Ruto is not only comparable to President Moi when he came to office in the late 70s, that was 78, upon the death of President Jomo Kenyatta. And there are images, and if you remember one of those coffee table books about that really tried to illustrate his early years, carrying huge stones to
gabions.
Building gabions and
yes.
all that. There was a lot of physicality associated with the role of the president, and we are seeing a lot of that because when you look at how President Ruto operates, 3, 4, 5, 6 functions in a day, a chopper ride from here to there, and a road trip. I was once in Naivasha for one of his functions, and only to learn that we were about number 4 in the list of the functions that were packed in a particular morning. So in terms of the sheer use of physical energy, a lot of that has gone into his style. Now, questions, of course, arise, and I heard when Wanjiru talks of settling down, because the presidency at the end of the day is also a day job. It actually requires you to sit behind a desk, and in the US they call it the resolute desk. The desk of final resolve. So same here, because the buck stops with the president in any country. You are the head of the country. And so it is assumed that there'll be some time you'll sit behind that desk and do some work that is also physical, paperwork, or just a moment of thinking. And, you know, we were seeing a lot of reviews this week, some talking about an endless kind of campaign style, you know, traveling around the country, popping out of this SUV sunroof and making campaign-like speeches. We are seeing that too. And I think that also contributes to this state of the country being a bit unsettled and the election mood not actually settling down, because we are seeing exactly the same kind of scenarios that we saw in election campaigns. You see, in the old days, the presidential functions were supposed to take place in specific addresses. You'll go to a primary school, so there's a setup that is even more secured than what we see now. But these days, you know, the president will pop out of the sunroof of his car, even in the middle of a market. And what that does also is to keep that electioneering mode and mood going on.
Yeah, and in fact, it was in that style that you have described that he made the now infamous Mambo Matatu phrase. I want us to hear that, that statement from him, and of course, right after that, a reaction to that from members of civil society.
Ndio nimeambia wakora wote na matapeli na wezi pamoja na wafisadi wote mambo yao ni matatu. Either wahame Kenya, waende jela, ama wasafiri waende mbinguni. Ama namna gani, my friends?
The utterances of the president, especially the infamous Mambo ni Matatu, is a confirmation of the regime's hand in perpetuating police and other state-sponsored brutality. After swearing in, the president condemned extrajudicial executions and promised to put a stop to police killings and institute public inquiry into the same. It is becoming apparent, however, that there has been a reconstitution of a police killer squad that has been targeting innocent Kenyans. The deployment of police to suppress protests was perceived as an endorsement by the political leadership to employ excessive force, including injuring and killing protesters.
So, Sam, here we are. This statement that now either takes a life of its own, depending, obviously, on which side of the political divide you fall, it would seem in this country that statement is now taken, you know, differently. So some say, yes, this is how we should fight corruption. Others say, well, it, you know, sort of opens the window to some other methods that will be outside of the law.
Right, a very controversial statement. And I remember around the time that he made that statement in Western Kenya, there's a member of parliament who was in studio, and he was saying that if it were him, that he was the president, he would not just say, he would actually do. And of course, you don't want to try and understand what that exactly means, but it's such an unfortunate statement that would come. But then again, you also realize that there are a lot of, during that 1 year that William Ruto has been the president of the Republic of Kenya, there's a lot of, is it sort of testing with the masses, a lot of speech in the public space, and then thereafter you see action happening. As late as the Mambo Matatu statement, you saw eventually certain cases being withdrawn because he had said that those people that are calling themselves investors, they have no interest in the business of Mumia Sugar, and they have to withdraw those cases because we cannot continue the way we are. And those cases were withdrawn. If you remember, at the very start, I think it was early in the year, that he spoke about the NHIF contributions, that we've been contributing very minimal or a very small amount of money, a maximum of 1,700 shillings, including himself, whose salary is about 1.4 million shillings. And he was saying that he should be asked to pay about 27,000 because of his salary of 1 million shillings. Way later, you realize that actually there are amendments to regulations of the NHIF that are proposing the 2.75%. So you start to understand what exactly he's saying. And I get concerned, Wanjiru, because when you look at the president, how he's introducing policy proposals to the public, you first hear it in a meeting, like on the roof of the car. Then after that, you will see the documents coming in. What does that mean? Is it public participation, or who is informing, especially when you are in a country that participation is too important before it can take a political angle?
Right, totally. And you know, on the issue of the statement, and like you said, it was a statement directed at investors. And I can imagine investors who are doing their risk analysis of Kenya saying, well, this is the president of Kenya who's talking about the courts in a certain way and is threatening investors, cartels or whatever, you know, situation notwithstanding. So rule of law is important. It's important to attract the kind of investors we need to take our country forward. So when we then, sorry, I forgot the other issue. Totally.
No, you tease the issue in the public,
right.
Then you see the document.
Yeah. Apologies. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it is extremely concerning that the policy making side has been jumped in so many aspects. I mean, it was good to see the education task force go around and collect views, and this is what we'd have expected of the housing levy, for instance, because that's one big one that has been. That's not a policy process. It's a public participation process. It's a parliamentary process. It's like sitting around the table with a bunch of ideas and Parliament beginning to formulate strategies to implement. And it doesn't make sense. And we've then come up with a bit of a mongrel that has, you know, really lost a lot of credibility in the eyes of the public and has received a lot of criticism. Yes, I think this could be a legal issue. It's something that could be litigated. But more to the point is that this is an administration that's creating very, came on a platform of transformation, has some very different proposals. I wouldn't say radical, but very different proposals, whose impact is not fully known. So the policy-making process allows you to consider what are the likely impacts, what are the likely consequences, what are the costs, how does this impact. But no, we are moving, everything's shooting by the hip. It's a lot. It's all at once. It all needs money. It needs to be financed. And they're not measuring or reporting. For the last, we haven't had a public expenditure review since the COVID period, where we had a small one, but the last proper public expenditure review was in 2017. This is where government says, well, we made certain assumptions, we spent money, and this is what happened. So when you come to begin, really picking the last shilling from the pockets of Kenyans, you want to be able to say, based on our past record, what we've seen, and based on the policy, we are making certain decisions. So much as Kenyans are very unhappy about the taxation, I think there's an even bigger violation of our social contract in that these decisions are being made at a very superficial level. So our legislative process has broken down, and Parliament is allowing this. And this also links with the bureaucracy. Yeah. What is the relationship between the head of state and the bureaucracy? So the head of state is making the policy. The bureaucracy is supposed to make the policy. These are political statements that then get translated into policy by the bureaucracy. So our government model is one that, looking at where this will take us, it feels and looks shambolic. Just to add on to that about how it's roadside declarations are made and then, it's sort of policy that follows. I remember with the first time we heard of the lifting of the logging ban that had been in place for 6 years, it didn't come out like... It was actually at a public event, and then after that you start to hear from the Kenya Forestry Service and the others about how they're going to implement it. Granted, perhaps these things have happened the way we expect them to behind the scenes, but the first time you hear of it is at this declaration, and then now you start to hear about it from the organizations or the institutions that are supposed to implement it. But we also had the curious statement after the Mambo Matatu, and then talking about investors and how they are frustrating perhaps the work of Mumias Sugar at the courts.
But then we also heard then another stern warning to the judges, once again, which was interesting for me because for an administration that came on the platform of we're going to uphold the independence of the judiciary, in fact, to his credit, the very first thing he did on the day he was sworn in was to, swear in the 6 judges who had been rejected by President Uhuru Kenyatta at the time. And then there was the operationalization, of the judiciary fund. And then again, you see this. So what does this tell you, Rungu? Is it, hot and cold, back and forth? What are we to make, or how do we understand or interpret this administration style and, which way it's going? Because sometimes it would feel like, it's sort of back and forth, one step back, one
I think at the risk of conflating or collapsing the president with Kenya Kwanza, if we just stay with the president at the moment. I mean, I think we've seen, him at his worst and at his best all within this year. And I think the president at his worst was the famous, deport, detain, or death. So the death warrant. I mean, not necessarily a warrant, but a death sentence that was announced. And I think for me, there was a moment there where I began to worry about, whether we are now moving towards the kind of governance that we've seen in places like Philippines. Or Bolsonaro in Brazil, where actually the president's statement is enough to kill somebody. That the entire system will basically align with that statement. And unfortunately, as Kenyans, we know this. We know this from the late 1980s. Mpende musipende was the phrase that Daniel Arap Moi used to say. And we have gone too far, I think, down this path of democracy, down this path of constitutionalism, for I think, anybody to govern like that. So I think the concern that I would have is, that this these moments that we've seen, very strong statements that are not, I guess, anchored in rule of law, that they will not continue in the years to come. We've also seen, him at a much stronger position, and these are the examples we've spoken about: the independence of the judiciary, the importance of rule of law, his concerns around improving the intergovernmental relationships between county governments and the national government, which were disastrous during Jubilee. We've seen, good signs of this. The leadership we're seeing on climate change, the leadership we're seeing on Sudan and DRC. So there is, I think, 2 sides to the presidency. And I think for 56 million Kenyans, we have to call for the side that is essentially aligned with our democratic culture and our constitutionalism, and nothing less.
You talk about the 2 sides of the president. I was speaking to someone who said it would seem the international community views him differently from perhaps what the Kenyans might do. So the president has been on a campaign of being styling himself as the Pan-Africanist leader, speaking on the international stage where he, fronts for, a better Africa. He's taken on the bold step of, calling for reform in the international financial system, talking about how unfair it is to Africa, talking about the debt burden, like you said, Sudan and the region as well. And I think with every visit from every head of state, we have seen him call for an end to visa requirements for those who want to come into the country. But then, do we see a different president now when he's talking to the Kenyan people, to whom he, took an oath to serve and protect?
I think he's running a very interestingly multi-pronged strategy. On the international stage, he knows he has to introduce himself to the big stage, and he's been approaching it in a number of ways. The Nairobi Climate Summit was particularly a big stage, and he enjoyed that. And look how well he milked it. From the television opportunities, he went up there so many times.
Moderated panels.
Moderated panels, yes. Because he knew the world attention is on climate change and the African summit that was taking place here. So he milked it very, very well. On the political side, and I just want to talk a bit about this, what do we call it, the 3 threats.
Mambo ni matatu.
Mambo ni matatu. It's either jail, deportation, or journey to heaven. which...
That's polite. You know, to get to heaven, you have to die first.
Yes.
Well, unless you're Elijah, but, you know.
Well, yeah, Elijah was the exception.
I don't know, what if it's a new government policy and maybe there's a way that you don't have to die?
Miracles do still happen.
Gullible Kenyans.
Yes. Yes.
That would take a lot of prayer.
Yeah, and talking of gullibility, and I just wanted to make this point about the president knowing his base very well. Let's go to the context of this Mambo ni Matatu. He was in Western Kenya, a place where the common person has actually suffered so much because of the poor state of the sugar industry there. The collapse of Mumia's sugar is a very painful story in Western Kenya. And you can even add on to that the collapse of pan paper mills, to the pain of people who used to wake up in a very promising environment, good schools. I remember Mumia's sugar.
The economy around Mumia's, around the factory,
Yes, so he's tapping onto those grievances and presents himself as the liberator, savior, and you know who is wronging you? That guy, whoever it is. And remember this time they had a real name, Rai, one of the persons that were involved in the whole story of the cases that were in court. And let's not forget how it actually started. He said, withdraw that case or 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Because what has happened now is the president is converting these 3 threats to a slogan, an anti-corruption slogan. He repeated it in Meru, which is very far away from Mumias. So the crowd cheered. The crowd in Mumias cheered. The crowd in Meru also cheered. Because I think the president has figured out that it sounds good and right to sound outrageous, say those outrageous things, and your crowd is happy. So he's very good at serving, what do I call it, a la carte kind of speeches, that this is specifically for this crowd. Would he, for example, go to Nyanza or here in Nairobi and issue the same? It's a bit difficult, but he serves it to regions and different audiences. Only that what he's doing now, again, is converting it to an anti-corruption slogan. Yeah.
Right. Yes, go ahead. I mean, we have some breaking news on fuel prices, but, you know, I
think we should go to that. I mean,
okay, all right. Let's do that now because that's an important one. So just to bring you up to date, we've been waiting for this all day, and we'll come back and talk about that. So the new prices for the next month are now in from the Energy Petroleum Regulatory Authority. As of midnight tonight, the price of super petrol goes up by 16 shillings and 96 cents. Diesel increases by 21 shillings and 32 cents. And kerosene, this is the biggest one, increasing by 33 shillings and 13 cents per litre. So that's a big one, and that's the news that's just in right now from IPRA. So a big jump. We will come and talk about why that is significant, because there was things like a G2G oil deal which were actually negotiated within the first year of President Ruto. But yeah.
Curiously, that's a huge jump for kerosene.
Yes,
recently.
33.
Bottom up.
Maybe just to state the specific figures.
Yes.
In Nairobi, a litre of petrol will cost you 211 shillings. 64 cents. At the moment, we've been buying at 194 shillings.
Yep.
A litre of diesel will cost you now 200 shillings, 99 cents. And kerosene will cost you 202 shillings, 61 cents. That is in Nairobi. Of course, it gets worse if you are to go further away from Nairobi. Let me just see if I can get the figure of Mandera. Well, I have Marsabit. Marsabit, a litre of petrol will be 220 shillings. For diesel, it will be 209 shillings, 43 cents. Kerosene will be more expensive at 211 shillings, 4 cents. We've not been here. We've never crossed the 200.
The 200.
200 is like a mental...
How much
yes, isn't it? Yeah, the mental barrier once you've crossed that. Yeah.
What did you
get
ask?
figures from Ruiru, then...
Well, Ruiru...
yes, Sam.
Let me just see.
Our Ruiru correspondent.
I can see thicker. I can see Roy will have
Well,
to
Thika will do.
We may have to ask someone. Well, Thika is 211 shillings 64 cents.
Yeah.
Diesel is 200 shillings 99 cents. It's just the same as Nairobi.
So just to confirm, Thika and its environs, including Ruiru, are not any cheaper
No.
than Nairobi or Eldoret?
I may not be sure, but the statement I'm reading shows there's no difference.
Are you sure of your figures?
I am sure of my figures, but we can confirm.
All right, but listen, this is huge.
It is.
33 shillings, an increase of 33 shillings and 13 cents per litre for kerosene, which is where we've got...
Has EPRA given a justification?
Well, yes, they do talk about an increase in the landed cost. But, I would like to just talk about, and perhaps this will help us pivot into that conversation. In the beginning, when the G2G, government-to-government oil deal was first fronted, they said two things. One, the price of fuel was high. Number two, the exchange rate of the Kenya shilling to the dollar. I remember quite silently the issue of the cost or the effect that that deal would have on the cost then just, went silently. And in fact, they said that the issue is with the cost of the dollar. At the time that they introduced or spoke about that deal, the Kenya shilling to the dollar was about 128, if I'm not wrong. Today, it is 150. In fact, it has crossed the 150 mark. So on both counts...
Another psychological...
Yes. So that deal has not helped us. In fact, we had the president saying... that, he anticipates that in the next couple of months, were his exact words, that the dollar would go to 120, and he said, in his estimation, even below 115. That is yet to happen. Now, remember, one of the other things that's important is that we have to, it's right about now that we owe, our first payment for this G2G deal is coming due. It is this month, at the same time that we're doing that. That difference in the dollar is what you're going to have to pay for one way or another in this, fuel price review. Because remember, in as much as the justification was that people were going to be moving, it is the oil marketers that are looking for dollars, and that's what's putting pressure and higher demand on the market. But what happened was we shifted the search for the dollars from the oil marketers to government, which said we are accumulating Kenya shillings, and at some point we will, convert that into dollars. So we're just shifting the demand and the search for it from the oil marketers basically to the government. And so here we are today, 6 months after that deal. Dollar is gone even higher. The oil prices have gone even higher than before. And this was one of the key, planks and pillars for this administration coming in, Wanjiru.
Right. Of course, they came in with a whole set of factors working against them, and they were very aware. Now, this completely torpedoes every statement and plan they have in place. Yeah. Because this is not only going to hit the dollar reserves, the exchange rate, then there's the cost of business. There's the household budget. There's the anticipated revenue from an economy that's able to run. Now, businesses are already crying because they're overtaxed. They're already crying because the cost of fuel is too high since removal of the subsidy, which I thought was then reintroduced in a small way to try and cushion.
It was called a stabilization fund.
Right.
Not a subsidy.
Right. Yeah, semantic. But the point is, government is struggling with a deficit that it can't meet. And rather than come out and say, we're in a crisis. And we saw this with the Ruto administration. We saw this after 2017 when government kept saying, things are, we're managing things, and the IMF was there saying, yes, everything, the debt is sustainable. Yeah. And we're saying the fundamentals aren't there. Money was borrowed and stolen. Mm-hmm. Money was borrowed and put in projects that did not give returns. And these debts are going to come due. Unfortunately, they've come due at a time when the exchange rate is working against us, when the cost of fuel is extremely high. Now, looking at, there's another document that was released today, which was a kind of budget statement by the Parliamentary Budget Office that analyzes the statements of government. And the government had put on hold some of its infrastructure projects that it had deemed non-priority. They are back online. They had made certain concessions to try and reduce the expenditure bill, but they've removed those. And what they're doing instead is trying to raise more taxes from Kenyans. This is what, you know, if there was an economist in the room, you're talking about stagflation. You're talking about high cost of inputs, and you're talking about business winding down and revenues about to crash. And, you know, businesses are saying this. We're not, the circulation isn't there. People aren't, the business isn't there. You know, the demand is, right now it's not even pending bills. It's where's the work in so many sectors. So, the better plan is becoming, is closing out instead of opening opportunities, because there are some good aspects of that plan, the value addition and all. But this singular focus in putting together this bunch of projects and ignoring the realities that you can't tax people beyond what they're able to pay. And that you need to look at the accountability and other options.
Yeah.
It's all bets off. Maybe the last point, we have a medium-term debt strategy that this government has already breached. It's like a joke. We've gone back to the domestic market at higher rates than ever before.
Yeah.
What are we saying? Who is speaking truth to the president? And this is part of what I was saying. There's a major disconnect between the promises and what's happening and the PR. So the promises were there, the PR is selling us, but the actions of government are scary.